Hey everybody, Mary Fran Bontempo here. And before we get started with today's show, I just wanted to let you know that my new book, From Broken to Brilliant, How to Live a Brilliantly Resilient Life, is available on Amazon. Super excited about this book, which provides a roadmap of how to live a brilliantly resilient life. You'll get advice not only from me, but from so many dozens of our podcast guests who were kind enough to share their tips on how to reset, rise, and reveal your own brilliance. So head on over to Amazon, get a copy of the book From Broken to Brilliant, and now let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you just visiting or are you going to live there? I'm Mary Fran Bontempo. Join me and let's learn how to come through those train wrecks, not broken, but brilliant. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. I'm Mary Fran Bontempo and I have a brilliant guest today. Ash Beckham is an inclusion activist whose TEDx talk, Coming Out of Your Closet, became a viral sensation, and it's fantastic. I watched it, I have to tell you. Her intrepid, relatable, and intrinsically comical style has made her an in-demand speaker, including events at Microsoft, Lockheed Martin, Bank of America, and the keynote for the first LGBTQ conference at Harvard University. Ash is also the author of Step Up, How to Live with Courage and Become an Everyday Leader. Ash, thanks so much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here, Mary Fran. Thanks for having me.
So there's so many things that I want to talk to you about. First of all, I loved your TEDx talk because one of the things that you started on was everybody has a closet. And that to me, one of the things that I try to do when I speak and all those things is create this sense of community right off the bat. And boy, did that hit home for me. So tell me a little bit about how you got to that. Tell me how you got to, where you are right now. Let's start with your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was, for me, I lived in a progressive place. I lived in Boulder, Colorado. So it wasn't anything where, I was an activist in the way that I kind of envisioned it, right? Like it didn't involve soapboxes or picket signs or any of that. And that just kind of wasn't my way. But I like lived my life out and I was comfortable and it was great. And there was, challenges, but that was about it. It was a pretty peaceful existence. But then I realized that it was actually bigger than me. I feel like so many of us, right? Once you kind of like land in yourself at whatever age that happens to be, there's a moment of kind of getting your feet under you. And then after a while, then you're like, wait, if this is so much better. I wish other people could do this, not necessarily like me, but the truest version of themselves. And I figured if I had the that foundation and that support, that I had so many friends that weren't able to speak up, that it was almost a responsibility to do so. So that kind of turned into a speaking effort that turned into a TED Talk that turned into a career I wasn't expecting.
One of the things that you say is, let me see where this is. Okay, we don't necessarily pick where we become leaders.
Yeah, absolutely, which I think is so important. And that was kind of the impetus of the book, right? I would have so many people that would come up to me when I would speak, either at colleges or universities or corporate events, and they would say, "Oh, Ash, I love this. When I dot dot dot, I'm gonna use these tactics, right? When I get that degree, when I have that many direct reports, when I have this title after my name, right?" And the idea, but if you ask anybody else in the room, all of those people were leaders, right? Maybe not in a traditional org chart sense of it, but they led by who they were, right? And so my idea was that anybody from the, Fortune 50 CEO to the bench warmer on the seventh grade basketball team has the power to lead in the way they show up every day. They just have to realize that they have that power.
That resonates with me so profoundly because I talk about it in terms of your brilliance. Whatever
Sure.
your, everybody has that. Everybody has something at which they are intrinsically good. And we tend to devalue that, I think, in this country, because if it's not blood, sweat, and tears, you think, it's just something that I do. But those are the places where you have the opportunity to lead, where you have the opportunity to set an example. But what's interesting to me about your situation, you talk about a lot of times, like for me, my leadership came because my son's in recovery from heroin addiction. Well, nobody wants to be in that place, but I ended up realizing that if I used my own pain points to talk about my experience, it could help other people. But you came to this from a place of being pretty comfortable. So that's not usually how this works. So how did you sort of go, okay, I got to step up here?
Yeah, well, I think that so many of the times, people, if they can't find a point of connection, then they assume that we are different, right? Like even you and I jumping on this call, we see each other, and I'm like, okay, I can make all these assumptions about your appearance. She's friendly, she's this, she's that. We're similar enough. We probably have a similar story, but it's those hidden stories that we don't know. And as soon as we get to those, we're like, oh, it's different. I don't know. Is my personal struggle with coming out harder than your struggle with
Hmm.
your son's recovery? I don't know. Am I presumptuous if I think mine is harder? Am I demeaning myself if I think mine is less? Is that being too humble, right? Like we do this thing where we rank what our challenges are, and then somehow that puts us on this podium of life. And to me, that's not what the challenge is. The hardest thing you've ever done is the hardest thing you've ever done. And it is no easier or harder than the hardest thing I've ever done, right? It's so relative. So for me, it was making these connection points of, sure, yeah, some things seem different, but if we really connect as humans that have gone through something that's been challenging to us, and we take out kind of the basis, we take out the details, right? We take out the content and we make it about the context, which is just like a human struggle,
Hmm.
then we can relate, right? Then we can go into, okay, this is why it was more challenging. This is why it was less challenging, right? Like these are the circumstances that created that point. But on a very basic level, we are humans that are struggling. And that to me is just such a point of connection. And that's where you build trust. And that's where you kind of then lean into and have the openness, not only to share your own story and be vulnerable, but the empathy to hear somebody else's, to know what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. And that was kind of the point of that, was to kind of level set on hard is hard.
And I think to your very valid point, we don't get very far if we don't establish some kind of a connection.
Absolutely.
And when we do take it to its most basic, and that was one of the things that I started with my a former partner, I started Brilliantly Resilient with. My son was in recovery from heroin addiction. Her two kids were born blind. And we were like, even though our circumstances were very different, we both had these pain points, but we also, interestingly enough, both had sort of ways of navigating that kind of ended up being teachable. And I think that you sort of found that too when you talk about your 8 pillars of how to become an everyday leader. So let's talk about first of all how you got to that point, and then let's get into the 8 pillars. How did
Yeah,
that become
absolutely.
like your equalizer?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was, along the same lines of wanting to write the book and kind of figuring out these tools that I wanted people to have, that people didn't really know that they, in the same way that you're saying people are intrinsically brilliant, which I love, that people are intrinsically leaders. They have skill sets within them, and they're not the ones that necessarily make the, New York Times bestseller list for leadership development, but
Mm-hmm.
they are human characteristics that transcend the workplace, right? Like the skills that you need as a parent. And to me, that's why you and the former person that you made the podcast with, like you connected on motherhood.
Yep.
And that is an incredible equalizer, right? There are these things, these roles that we hold in society, I think, that are equalizing. And the circumstances, again, don't matter, because you've held your child in their pain and in their frustration. That I think transcends relationship. That builds connection. You know what that's like, because you know what it's like to give that comfort, and you know what it's like to feel that you can't possibly comfort them enough, right? And that, again, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. That's just life. And so for me, you want to have the right skills at the right time. And if I'm a truly a leader, I'm a I'm a leader in my workplace. I'm a leader in my community. I'm a leader in my home. But all of those circumstances take a different set of skills. So the 8 pillars really to me is like a tool belt. That, they
Hmm.
say when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But you know that any situation that you approach requires a different skill set, right? If I'm going in to talk to a potential client and close the deal, but have to have some really honest conversations about some of the dysfunction I see on their workplace team, then I'm going to use a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy, some responsibility, a lot of courage to have a hard conversation. At the same time, if I'm going in to have a conversation with my son about why it's impossible for him to add one more sport to our social calendar, then I need a little bit of humility. I need some compassion, but I need a little bit less courage, right? So I need a little bit more grace. I need a little bit more authenticity. So the idea of the pillars is almost like a recipe book that you, as the best leader you can be, have access to all of these tools, some of them intrinsic, some of them are learned. And then you assess the situation and you decide, what does this situation need from me? How can I lead best in this situation? As opposed to steamrolling your
Huh.
leadership style into this situation. So that was the point of the 8 pillars, is that we need some choice, right? There's not one way to lead, which means all of us can do it. And our same skill set doesn't get applied to every situation that we need to lead in.
That's brilliant. And I think people probably do that automatically in some ways, in many ways, in terms of who they're talking to. Whether you obviously you speak to your boss differently than you speak to your partner or your kids or whatever. But at the very heart of this, it's about finding the way to best communicate with the person in front of you. Is that what I'm
Exactly.
hearing here?
Exactly. And you need to understand that person and all of their dynamics. And it just is such, I think when you give yourself so many tools, you give yourself this adaptability and this resilience that comes from having this different tool set, is that, your boss at 9 a.m. on a Monday is a different person than he is at 4 o'clock on a Friday, right? And my son, in the same way, has he eaten, right? Like, you have to be so smart about the context of what you're doing, and is this effective time to have this conversation? And sometimes you have to have them when you don't want to, but when you can be more compassionate, more understanding of the person standing opposite you, you really can deliver it. And I'm not saying you minimize your message. I'm not saying that you compromise. It's just like you said, the way that you communicate is going to be so much more effective in that connection. When you connect, you can collaborate. When you collaborate, you can move forward in all the ways. It becomes more of a, you and I are doing this together than I am telling you what to do or I'm asking you for something. It makes it so much more multidimensional than just this linear transactional conversation.
So at the very heart of this, and again, I'm looking over the pillars here, I'm seeing a lot of recognition of the emotional part of a human in here, as opposed to, when we think about leadership, we think about logic, we think about strategy, we think about all that stuff. But it seems like there is a lot more that can be accomplished if we also add the emotional quantity and quality of a human existence into the conversation. Does it start there with if we had to bring it down to its most basic, can we say, be aware that you're talking to a human?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant way to sum it up. And again, that's why it's, you know, how to find courage and become an everyday leader. This is something that you do every day, right? Like, do I need to have, you know, strategies on 5 year plans of launching a startup every day? Probably not, right? Like, those
Yeah.
are not tools that I need to have every day. Do I need strategy? Do I need logic? Absolutely. But the idea is that when you incorporate this into your everyday life, you have the ability to be able to lean in, and it actually becomes, it's less of something you do and more of someone that just who you are. It's how you operate in the world every day. And again, you don't stop being a leader when you close your laptop at the end of the day. I want to be the same type of person when I'm in line at the local coffee shop or when I'm going to the grocery store or at my kids' athletic event as I am. I think that when we come in, we find our authentic leadership style, we are the same human. We show up with compassion and we recognize both the context and the history and the emotional state of the other person, as well as recognizing our own, right? Like we don't operate in a vacuum.
Oh yeah,
We're bringing all that other
there
stuff
are
with us
days when
as
I need a
well.
sandwich to move forward. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like I cannot have this conversation until I have some almonds, like whatever it is, right? Like you have to sit there and be so, and that's kind of the point of it as well, is when you're so intent and focused on recognizing the emotions of someone else, you're inherently recognizing it in yourself because you are taking, again, not just the content of our conversation, but the context of our conversation. We're taking that in the most effective way to be able to show up in the way that we want to have the most collaborative interaction, right? So I think that it is this everyday skill set that you can develop, you know, market specific strategies. You can use that historical. I don't think you completely put that on the shelf, but at the same time, I think, yeah, recognizing that whatever you're doing, you are interacting with a human first. The power dynamics of if they're their child, your partner, someone that has betrayed you, whatever that is, a vendor, somebody in an adversarial relationship, they are a human as well. And that kind of, I think, settles us and grounds us enough that that's just a completely different launch point for
Yeah.
beginning anything if you can have that recognition.
Yeah, I think again, one of the things that you say, which is really profound, that leadership is a mindset, it's not a job title.
Yeah.
And that's huge because once again, it takes the semantics, it takes the analytics, not necessarily out of it, but it lets you helps you to realize that there's another component to that. And a lot of it is about yeah, you have to do all that stuff. When you're leading, regardless of where it is, there are facts and figures and stuff that just have to be part of because we live in the world, which has schedules and has things and has, deadlines that have to be met. But when you add that human component, I think, first of all, it it shows your vulnerability and it accepts their vulnerability. And I think that's a part of this too. Yes?
Yes, 100%. And I think along the lines of what you said, and this it feels so simple, but feels so in opposition to every promotional strategy I've almost ever seen is
Yeah.
just because you're good at something doesn't mean you can lead, right?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
it doesn't make you a good leader because you're good at it. You can be a good leader and be good at it, but those are two different skill sets. And in those people that have gotten promoted because they've just been so exceptional at it, and people think that brilliance in doing the job means that they have the brilliance to manage other people also doing the job. And those are two completely different things. And they need the support, right? They need to learn. And if you don't want to do that, then you can still just be good at your job, right? But again, those are two completely different things. And one does, just because you're good at leading people doesn't mean you're good at the data and the analytics, but if you're a good leader, you bring on the people that are good in the spots that you're not as good at, right? Like the other one translates a lot easier. And we know that that's a part of our professional development that we just have to have.
So, so this is kind of like it's like a building block sort of process here where you're again, a lot of this is about merging skill sets and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that there are a lot of moving parts to this. But can that get overwhelming? Like, is there a simpler way to approach this? And like we were talking about, recognize it's a human first. Okay, what's the next part of that? Like if you're trying to have these hard conversations with people and you have to get to an end point, you have to deliver something, you have to whatever, and you're the leader of a company, say, how do you get your team and you talk to a bunch of people, how do you get them to that space while recognizing everybody's humanity. But there's a lot of humanity there. Let's be frank. How do you do that without that becoming the overwhelming thing and get the job done?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that very basic balance. I think you create these clear agreements, right? We're all on the same page on where we need to go. There is some flex in how we can get there. If somebody might do better if they work 2 hours a day, but that's not going to work in our time frame.
Yeah.
So how do we figure out that, do they need to do 2 hours and then take a break and two, you know what I mean? How do you develop your own workflow that seamlessly fits into the plan
Mm,
of how we're all going to get there together, right? That we have the same accountability to get, because people want to be treated fairly, right? But
yes.
they also want to be, we know that there are different motivating factors, right? For some people, it's going to be the bonus at the end. For some people, it's going to be the recognition. For some people, it's going to be getting, being as efficient as humanly possible so they can get out of school in time to go pick up their kid and go visit their parent, who's in a retirement home, right? Like we all have different reasons that we want to. So that one person, like they don't want to have useless meetings in the middle of the day because it makes them less efficient, right? We just all have different things that motivate us to do what we want to do. But if you can honor everybody's individuality, bring them on board, have clear agreements together, some of which are two-way and some are this is the deadline that we're on,
Right.
and this is what happens if you fall short of your part, right? And we also have open communication. If I don't want to know that you're stressed out and maxed out 12 hours before the deadline when you knew 2 weeks ago, right? We have to be able to have that conversation where I can assist you. Things are always a little bit flexible, but if we agree on where we're trying to go, and if at any point anybody on the team thinks they can't achieve what they're responsible for, we come back together and figure out how to do it again, right? So it's kind of this like breathing, moving piece as opposed to this Excel sheet with check boxes that we just get through, right? And I'm like an Excel checkbox person, right?
Yeah.
But
Oh,
I know that I
yeah.
have a better team if there are people that don't think like that at all. And if I know that my team's going to be more creative, more innovative, the more diverse those perspectives are, the more diverse those learning styles and development styles are, I know it's going to be better, but I have to create an environment where people can show up fully as themselves to be able to bring those ideas, to be able to challenge the status quo, to be able to have these open conversations. So if you can't want diversity and not support it, or you're not going to get the benefits of having diverse perspectives.
And to allow for evolution within the
Yes,
process.
exactly.
Because if you're dealing with humans, there's stuff.
And I feel like, and this is kind of a little bit of a lofty goal and a little bit woo woo, but I truly believe that every interaction you have with another human, every interaction, you come out the other side changed. And so do
Oh,
they in little ways, right? And that's like, so if you're a team and you enter this project, whether it's a week or 6 years, you are inevitably are different coming out the other side, right? Like you have to be. You're interacting with humans. You're learning things. You're learning things about yourself. You're learning things about other people. You're learning things about systems. Like you, in the same way that you walk into the grocery store and I'm like a chatty person and you chat to the person who's checking you out, like I'm hopefully a little bit different. Did I necessarily learn something? Hopefully, but I connected on a human level. There's like a cellular part of me that is different because of the serotonin that's released when you actually connect with another human. So to see those things, to think, like you said, to think that I would go into a team project or any sort of effort with a group of people and we would go through something together and we would come out the other side and be unchanged is is just misses the mark so completely that it has to be able to evolve because we
yeah.
are evolving, right?
Yeah.
You can't have a system that doesn't evolve when every single component of it is evolving.
Right. Well, you can, but you're not going to keep up with anything.
Exactly.
And it
Exactly.
and it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't benefit anything if you're not willing to say, All right, let's see how things are even slightly different. Like maybe this again, not to get all woo-woo and talk about navel gazing, but maybe at the end of the day, you look at it and go, okay, like where take a few minutes to get a view of the big picture and maybe how it was different from the day before in terms of how you're progressing towards your goal. Does that kind of reflection fit into this?
100%. And I'm not saying this is, in rainbows and unicorns, right? Like it doesn't just constantly, the graph doesn't always go up and to the right. Like there are some times, and I feel like I do this in parenting all the time, where I was like, I will never do that again. Like I did this thing, I thought it was a great idea. I will never do that again. But that's part of the learning process, right? Like that's how you become better at any of the things, is to know what doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? And again, that's how we evolve. But if we're not trying things that don't work, that's how we evolve as teams, right? Is we have to know that we like go in, we figure it out, we bring these ideas, we bring them to some sort of fruition, and then we move on, right? But you have to know what doesn't work to ever get the best solution to what actually does.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to kind of bring this around a little bit to your TED Talk because you talked about the little girl who said, "Mommy, is that a boy or a girl?" And at some point, like you said, there's this frustration that obviously builds up in certain situations, and I'm saying that with everybody. I mean, but you're talking about your particular experience. But you managed to take the frustration out and just address that little girl and realize that her question wasn't a loaded one. What,
Right.
what I'm saying to you is in this day when everybody is like at each other about every little thing, how do we have these conversations where we want other people to be vulnerable and we want to be vulnerable without saying the wrong thing or having something that we say is interpreted as the wrong thing? I mean, everybody's so on edge today. Is there a way to get around that so that we can address each other on a human level and come without the negativity that both on our side as the, speaker or whatever, or the receiver of it? How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it comes back to what we said in the beginning, which is just building trust, right? We have to have trust for each other. We have to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to improve. I want to have this conversation. And if I say something wrong, I want you to tell me, right? I want you to hold me accountable for saying it. And I know that that's a hard thing to do. It's much easier to walk away and write somebody off, right? And it's like
Mm.
even the small version of like one-on-one cancel culture, right? We're like, oh, this person said the wrong thing, so that's it. They're
Right.
It's
Yeah,
it. I'm done.
done.
I'm not going to do it again. But I think that we have a responsibility as the speaker to be humble and take that feedback. And it's not, we go to the default of, in the defensive posture of, they're too sensitive, that's not what I meant. Like if somebody is telling you the truth about how something you said affected them, it is inarguable because it's how they felt, right? Now if they
Right.
say you're a homophobe, you're a racist, different line. But if they say it hurt my feelings when you said that because, or it angered me when you said that because, right? I can't argue with what makes you angry, right? That is inarguable. So when we take that, but that's much more vulnerable than naming somebody or labeling somebody else. So I feel like we have a huge responsibility to be able to create this environment where people can improve, where they can make a change, where we give them a chance. I would so much rather give somebody the benefit of the doubt and have that bite me than miss an opportunity to give somebody a chance to come back, right? Because all we want are conversations, right? None of these are one and done. It's like this perfect 15-second soundbite. Okay, we live in this world that is, again, constantly evolving. So we want to come back and have the same conversations. And the only that's like all I ever want. And it takes me back to when I was coming out to my parents. Like we were screaming at each other through like slammed doors, but we always talked. We never stopped talking. The only time it felt stale or like fatal in any way to me was when we weren't talking. So when we're talking about people that are aspiring allies or trying to understand a situation that they don't fully understand. They're trying to be compassionate. Like we know in our gut when someone is trying. Are they like trying the way that we think they should? I don't know. Then does that matter? Right? Like if we know they're trying, then we kind of lean in and say, I say this people like there's you can't ask me anything that's going to offend me. If you offend me, I'll probably tell you, but I'll also give you the answer, right? Because I know that you're making your best effort. Because I want the next time, I want you to come back to me again. Like I want to be your resource. That's leadership to me, is that somebody can come at their most vulnerable and ask you a question that within them has inherent risk. And even if they
Hmm.
screw it up, you're there, right?
Wow.
You're there. And maybe you're there to be like, hey, you know what? Next time we talk, I need you to read this article because I'm not doing this over and over again, right? And I can't explain it. But I think when we empower allies, right? To me, that situation is, oh, it's so much easier to ask somebody who's inherently like you a question, right? Like that's the power of allyship. Like we can't possibly overstate that, because if somebody's going to ask me a question about how my wife and I conceived our kids, like it's pretty personal, and I'll tell you, or they don't really understand how the dynamics work and who's the mom and who's the dad, right? Like that's really hard to ask me specifically. But if I have an ally who's like a straight dude who knows the answer to that question, it's much more likely that another straight dude will go up and ask him the question because he's like, ah, you've probably been there before, you understand. That like the risk isn't as great. So the more people around us that we can empower and help them on their journey to being allies, the more they can be allies to other people, right? It
Hmm.
seems like a lot of work sometimes because you're the one doing the work. But if you empower allies, sometimes you get to take a day off because somebody jumps in for you and they have access to places we're never going to be. I'm never going to be in the men's locker room. When
Yeah.
those things happen, an ally can stand up and be like, ah, whoa, 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 hey, let's run that back a little bit. Let's think about it again, right? Like I'm just never going to be there. So
Right.
you can't. It's this greater purpose for empowering people to understand our own humanity, so they can stand in when we're not there or too exhausted to do so.
This is amazing. I talk a lot about building your tribe, and this
Yep,
this this goes right hand in hand with that. I really never quite looked at it that way as building relationships with allies, but I really like that concept because right then and there it allows for understanding not only between those two people, but then it allows for understanding amongst other, air quotes here, different groups of people who might relate to the other person better than you or I, and allows that person to explain it. And then it allows the seeker of the information perhaps to ask questions in a more direct way that might be somewhat, you shouldn't say that to somebody else. But if we have those allies who can accept those questions and answer them or support us in that way, then you get the information that you're seeking, which is really the goal.
exactly. Exactly. And there's two different ways to do it, right? I had a friend of mine who explained it as like there's two different ways you can do it. You can call people in or call people out. And the call people in
Hmm.
is kind of like, when you've got broccoli in your teeth and you like want somebody to tell you that they don't, but you pull them aside. You don't like announce it in the middle of the meeting. You just like afterwards, you're just like, hey, here's the thing I thought you'd want to know. I'm just going to tell you. If you want to talk about it, great. If you don't, fine. But I would want, yeah, if it was me, I would want to know.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you say something in a meeting and somebody can pull you aside, that's calling people in, right? You're like, hey, I'm here for you. I'm going to do it. Calling out is also important, right? You hear something. I was coaching my kids' football team, and one of the boys made this disparaging comment about a girl on the other team, and I pulled him out of the game immediately, right? And like that, we don't do that here, and there are immediate consequences to that. And a good leader can balance when that happens. You want to call people in as much as possible, and sometimes you just got to make a call.
Yeah.
But there are two different ways to approach it, and knowing what it's like to be on the other side, you can envision which one you would want.
Right. So it also reflects accountability because, we have to be accountable to not only ourselves, which I think is everybody's too big of a priority these days, but we have to be accountable to other individuals, other, organizational structures and things that we're involved in. There is a measure of accountability in all of that. But according to your 8 pillars, and I'm just going to go through them real quick here: empathy, responsibility, courage, grace, individuality, humor, and patience. Every single one of those is about reacting to the human. And that's what I mean, to bring this conversation full circle, that's what I continue to see as the underlying message here. React to the other human and consider where they're coming from as well as where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like dividing that polarity of like us and them, right?
Mhm.
And so much of that it is innate, right? Like as creatures on this earth, there is a part of our brain that develops that sees different as bad and unsafe and same as safe, right? But there's
Right.
so many unseen things that we don't know about other people that there's probably way more similarities if we can lean in a little bit. And again, like people aren't, I mean, there's a short list of people that are that don't that act for selfish reasons that are
Hmm.
not rooted in any rationale, right?
Right.
But people have a history. They're not just like arbitrarily making decisions that are in complete disagreement with me. They like got there, and to have some curiosity in how they got there starts to see the humanity. Like if it's me, I feel fixed in enough of my beliefs that actually getting into a dialogue with somebody who's on the opposite side doesn't feel threatening to me.
Hmm.
I would hope I have enough curiosity and openness to at the very least see them as a human and maybe see how they got to this opinion that's so vastly different of mine.
Right.
But it isn't, it isn't lack of intelligence. People aren't stupid. They're not hateful. They're not, they're basically any of those things. They got there through some path that is wildly different from mine. And to see them as a human, I need to be at least a little bit curious about the path. That's the best thing about empathy is I don't have to agree with somebody.
Yeah.
I just have to be willing to step into their shoes and be a little bit curious about their perspective.
So
Right? Like I can do that with anybody.
it's suspending judgment and replacing it with curiosity and empathy.
Perfect. Exactly that.
This has been a fascinating conversation. I am so glad that we found each other.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
I have, as you may have noted, I've been scribbling furiously away here about with all of your brilliance bits. So please tell everybody where they can learn more about you and where they can get your book.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can get the book at any booksellers. If you go to bookshop.org, they go through independent booksellers, so you can get it that way. And then you go to ashbeckham.com, or I'm on social media at Ash Beckham, except Instagram is the Ash Beckham because I was a little bit late to the party there. So, but yeah, I'd love to connect to people and learn more about their stories, and happy to share more of mine.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me. Ash Beckham, the everyday leadership coach who just has so much brilliance to share with all of us. And if you need a little bit more brilliance, head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net where you'll see our little happy pop-up and you can sign up for our Brilliance Bit, which comes out every time we release a podcast episode. So Ash will be a part of that. And I will see you all next time on the next episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Join our Facebook group and follow us on YouTube to be inspired with tools to reset, rise, and reveal your brilliance.